Welcome to Curbside Chat. I'm your host, Lorraine Sommerfeld. This webcast is brought to you by the Automotive Industries Association of Canada. We take experts from every corner of the field that deal in the auto care sector. We'd like to thank all of these people for their help in sponsoring these webcasts. Today we're talking about collision repair and the importance of continuous training as well as creating and maintaining standards within that part of the industry. I'm joined by Stuart Klein, who's the Vice President of Collision at AIA Canada, and Nick Dominato, Director of Product Management at ICAR Canada. Welcome, both of you. I think it's safe to say that collision repair doesn't resemble even what it did a generation ago. The changing technologies with cameras and sensors, the composites that cars are made from now, it's changed the landscape. Stuart, what's the vision that AIA Canada has for ongoing collision repair?
Well, AIA Canada operates under license from ICAR, which is headquartered in USA. And the ICAR vision is that every person in the collision industry has the information, skills, and knowledge to do complete, proper, and safe repairs for the benefit of the consumer. So AIA Canada follows that ICAR vision when it comes to collision training.
Is there places in the world that you look to for direction or standards? Like, is there places ahead of us that you've seen are kind of setting the bar?
Well, we follow whatever ICAR US develops is what Canada follows. We have very similar structures and very similar vehicles when it comes to repairs. There's certain instances, such as with EV training, electrical vehicle training, there is no real standard presently in North America. And so ICAR, in the EV training they've developed, they've followed the European standard, ECER 100, so that it's still standardized to some standard.
You know, I'll just add on to that. It's interesting. It really depends on where you go and where you look. We're lucky, I think, in Canada. If you look in the United States, there's really no regulation or licensing of tradespeople who work in the collision repair industry, meaning you can be working at a Starbucks one day making a grande dark roast, and the next day you can be welding on a quarter panel.
Reassuring.
Yes. Here in Canada, we're a little bit better off, I would say. So we do generally have provincial trade licensing, and you need to go through a college program and apprenticeship typically. But it's interesting because what we've seen is there's so much development in collision repair, so much new technology, that it's no longer the case that you can just kind of go to school once, learn how to fix a car, and you're good for the next 30 years. So we've got electric vehicle training, ADAS training, all of these new technologies, new materials. So I would say if you look over to Europe, certainly some countries are probably even a little bit further ahead when it comes to things like EV handling. But to be fair, they have more EVs on the road. So I think we're getting there. But I think Canada's in a great spot, especially when we look down south at our southern neighbor. I think we're in a good spot. But truly, it's no longer good enough to kind of go to school once because of how technology is shifting so quickly.
We spoke previously, Nick, about ADAS, those fabulous security systems that are now in everything. I would say that curve is probably ahead of the EV curve because there's been more of them in more models of cars. What impact is that having on collision repair?
So it's having a pretty big impact. It's having a pretty big impact. You can take a look at the claim side, and it's having a big impact on severity. We haven't seen it have an impact on the number of collisions. So it seems like we have all these ADAS systems that help do auto braking and lane changing. But at the same time, we have this other piece of technology called the cell phone. And people like to stare at it when they drive. So we haven't seen the reduction in collisions overall, but we've seen severity kind of go up. On the collision repair side, we've seen an explosion of vehicles that need calibration as part of the repair process. So it's really a continuation of this technological trend that we've been seeing, starting with scanning. I would say 2016, 2017-ish is when you really started seeing that take off. And it's the evolution of fixing metal and plastic and different substrates on a car to fixing a computer, which is kind of what you have to do now as part of a repair process.
Stuart, you have a background in insurance.
Correct.
I would presume that you have to work hand in hand with these industries because one is paying for the repairs that you're teaching people how to carry out. How does insurance work with you? Are they keeping up? They're notoriously usually a couple years behind, at least when it comes to laws and things like that. What are you finding? How are you able to work in conjunction with insurance?
It's a double-edged sword, I guess. We have insurance carriers that are really up to date. Their staff takes ICAR training to make sure that their estimators are up to date, up to speed with technology. Not so much that they know how to repair a vehicle, but they understand how to diagnose damage on modern vehicles and understand the pains that the shop is going through and why that severity is going up. And there's, of course, it's a spectrum, I suppose you could say, where you have some insurers on the other end of the spectrum that, maybe are not keeping up, and that is a bit of a frustration within the industry, where a shop and the technicians are trying to do the right thing, do a safe, proper, complete repair, and make sure they get paid for it as well. Mm-hmm. And so there's a bit of a challenge with some insurers, where some insurers lead and some follow.
And
Nick,
sorry, Stu, I don't know if it's the same in Canada as the US, but we've seen a big shift, at least in the United States, with insurers. The demographics of the adjusters and the people who handle claims on the collision side has really shifted. Maybe 10 years ago, the person handling the claim for the insurer was maybe a retired body technician, someone who had been in the industry and kind of made the switch over, but really had kind of a decade or years of experience kind of fixing vehicles. And that's completely changed now, where we see a lot of the people handling claims on the insurance side have never picked up a hammer before, have never fixed a car, have never touched a car other than to drive it. So they're hiring people out of school, people maybe on the lower end of the skill and knowledge spectrum to keep claims costs down and for other reasons. But just goes to show the importance of training, especially now that we're seeing this shift in knowledge and skills in that adjuster base.
So we're trying to close that gap that's coming up. Nick, you mentioned the importance of calibration, and we talked about this a lot. A repair can look okay, as Stuart was saying, and a shop knows they can put it out and it looks fine. You've told me it doesn't always mean it's fixed properly because of what could be going on underneath the scene. And if you have adjusters who aren't familiar or don't want to pay out for that, how can consumers know they're getting the best repair? How can they know, if they can't tell by looking? What do we need to fill that chasm between it looks okay and it is okay?
Well, I would say the first thing that you want to do is make sure that the body shop that you're taking your car to has the right knowledge and skills to perform a complete, safe, and quality repair. And so I would say the first thing you probably want to look at is what kind of training have they done? Are they an ICAR Gold Class shop? You could also take a look at other things like, are they OEM certified? So if it's a Honda, are they a Honda Pro First certification? But that's probably one of the biggest things you can look for as a consumer is just, are they ICAR?
What's ICAR Canada Gold? What's that?
So what that means is that you have trained your staff who repair vehicles up to a certain level such that they can perform a complete, safe, and quality repair. So your structural technicians who may be performing structural repairs, non-structural technicians, your painters or what we call refinish technicians, and your estimators have all taken enough training, a sufficient level of training that they can estimate a repair, fix the vehicle properly, and then paint it and put it back on the road in a complete, safe, and proper fashion.
So this is part of the ICAR Canada standardization that we need to have in place for collision repair.
It's part of creating just a baseline foundation guarantee of knowledge and skills so that any consumer who takes their car into an ICAR Canada Gold Class shop, that consumer can be kind of safe in knowing that the people fixing their car have those knowledge and skills to put that car back on the road safely. Yeah.
Stuart, we're talking about workers now.
Mm-hmm.
How are we getting workers? Where are they coming from? How are we keeping them? What's the outreach like? Is AIA Canada, what kind of programs do they have in place and what are we doing?
That's a loaded question,
yes.
I guess. we have a lot of folks out there sort of waiting for somebody else to fix this problem. It's a problem getting people. It's a problem attracting people. It's there's a multifaceted approach to curing the problem. AIA Canada doesn't have a specific program that is attracting people to the industry. We do research and studies to help our members understand the marketplace. So if somebody's waiting for government to solve the problem, it may be a long wait. The government has a place in attracting people or making it easier to get people into the industry by maybe there's some reform required in our apprenticeship program, to shorten that up. Maybe there's some funding that they could give to shops to offset the cost of hiring an apprentice. When you hire an apprentice, it takes a while for them to pay. But I think a lot of the problems could be resolved really grassroots, the shop really taking charge of their own business and building their own pipeline of people. There's a lot of shops that are very, very successful at simply being involved in their local community and getting out to trade schools and high schools and events and getting to know teachers and instructors and holding an open house and having Try the Trades Day. There's so many things that they could do locally, get parents out to the shop to see that it's really a beautiful, clean environment that these folks could work in, these young folks, that it's really a promising career. And the shops that are doing that, grassroots, typically you see that they have a pipeline of people waiting to get into their shop. And it's sort of, there's long-term and there's short-term. I think government is long-term,
Okay.
local grassroots short-term.
Nick, how do we protect those futures we're creating for people that we do get into the industry? How do we keep them? What would you like to see employers doing to protect that future so we don't filter away and go into another trade or another aspect?
So I think one of the first things that you have to do as an employer is say, what are the type of people that are kind of entering the workforce? And really we're looking at Gen Zs nowadays, and they're a lot different than kind of baby boomers or Gen Xers, who are your kind of typical median body technician. So what does this new generation want? They want to work in a clean space. They want a space that's free of harassment and kind of the collision repair industry has been characterized at times as being a little bit old-fashioned in a lot of ways we do things. And I think when you take a look at the new generation who are coming up and attracting new talent, they are of a completely different mindset. So they want to make sure that it's a clean shop. They don't want to work in a very dirty area. They want to make sure that they have opportunities ahead of them. They want to know where they stand in the organization. They want to make sure that there's diverse group of people. So you as a shop owner, I think, have to take a look even at your physical building. Like, what is the infrastructure? What kind of shop are my people walking in and out of every single day? Do they feel valued? Because we're in a time now, I think, where people are coming to a job, being here for 2 years, leaving. So you really need to set up your building and your people, create the right culture, and kind of create that culture around the new people that are coming in, because that's different than the culture for the older body technicians who kind of typify our industry today.
Stu, we spoke earlier and you mentioned about the idea of specialization. A lot of this equipment is going to be very costly because a lot of these repairs are now going to be more costly. Where do you see shops needing to go? Should they be specializing something and sharing equipment maybe before they make these investments? What would you recommend?
I would say from a specialization standpoint that we spoke about, shops may find themselves needing to enter some new markets that they're not used to. Maybe they need to get into the glass business because of the calibration. Maybe they need to get into the ADAS business specifically because every vehicle is going to require it. You may find shops that simply don't want to work on EVs because in their particular market, there just may not be enough to substantiate that investment. I think you'll see a bit of a separation that shops maybe will not work on certain vehicles. Shops will maybe specialize in EVs. It's hard to say what the future is going to be, but that, like you mentioned, the cost of training and equipment to work on certain vehicles is going to be prohibitive potentially to some shops depending on the market they live in.
Nick, we spoke extensively about standardization in collision repair. Could you address ADAS and what that is meaning as we go forward, because now it's on everything?
So at a real high level, these ADAS systems are controlled by sensors on the car. So you've got a front radar sensor that's responsible for adaptive cruise control. You've got blind spot sensors on the quarter panel that are responsible for blind spot, and parking sensors are all around the car, maybe a few more depending on how optioned out the vehicle is. When you're involved in a collision, these sensors might get jolted, shifted, the brackets may have got bent or destroyed, and the structure or frame of the vehicle may have been damaged so that they're not pointing in the right direction. So if you think about a front radar sensor that's responsible for adaptive cruise control, it needs to look at the vehicle immediately in front of you so it can regulate your speed. But if you've been in a collision and your frame's been damaged and the front radar sensor is looking 2 or 3 degrees to the left now because the frame's bent, 100, 150, 200 meters down the road, it may be looking at a different lane. So it's going to completely mess up these ADAS systems, and that's where kind of calibration comes in. Is you're putting a target in front of the sensor, you're pressing a button, and the car is understanding, okay, the sensor is pointed in this direction, and so it can adjust for it. So it knows, hey, maybe it's bent a little bit. It can sense that based on where the target is and make an adjustment. So what we're really talking about is making sure that these safety systems, which is really what ADAS sensors are working properly when the car is put back on the road, so that when your car is doing an emergency braking function, it's because the car in front of you is stopping rapidly and not the car a lane over, which might cause some issues to you and your passengers and the people on the road if your car starts braking suddenly because of other things on the roadway. Yeah, that it shouldn't be. Yeah.
Cars doing things all on their own. Welcome to the new world, folks.
Yes, and that has happened many times. So that's really what we're trying to avoid when it comes to calibrations and these ADAS systems.
Stu, from a consumer's point of view, what he just described sounds incredibly complicated, and a lot of us, depending on which generation you want to pick from, if it's all banged in, you make it straight again and you make it pretty and you refresh the paint. Obviously, there's far more at risk here, and the fact your car can start doing things all on its own, well, that's always a fun headline for some of us in this business. How do we get this message to consumers that it's not what it used to be? This isn't your dad's Buick. What kind of information do we get to them? How do we explain to a customer that comes into the shop that it's not $1,000 or $800? Where
I think shop staff, the educated shop staff at like say a gold class trained shop, are good at explaining it to customers. Customers might not always understand it, or we've certainly run into customers that don't even believe it, quite honestly. So I think that some of it falls maybe on the insurance company. The majority of repairs are so expensive they go through insurance, and I think some of it can fall on the insurance companies to educate their clients when they get into a collision about some of those things. That might be one way. To run a national public advertising campaign, I don't know who would pay for that. It would take, So I think it's somewhat grassroots. It's up to the shop to explain it to the customer, and maybe the insurance has a piece in there to explain that these systems need to be done. We've run into certainly situations where a qualified shop has told the customer they need to get the windshield camera calibrated. The shop wasn't equipped to do it. They sent them to a place to do it, and that particular vendor said, no, it didn't need to be done. Said the shop was lying. I mean, this is the kind of things we run up against. You've probably got some examples too.
Yeah, I'd even flip it on its head, and I would say today you're more at risk as a shop of the vehicle really knowing a lot about their systems. They drive in them. These cars are marketed as having ADAS systems, about being able to help drive themselves. So these consumers are like hyper aware of these ADAS systems. And you run the risk as a shop, if you don't stay on top of your training, if you don't know about these sensors, if you don't know that they have to be calibrated, you run the risk of your consumer knowing more about your car than you do. And that's true for EVs as well. So that's where kind of that having that lack of training can really put you in a pinch. So if a customer comes in and you've got a young customer living in the city, driving a brand new car, it's a lease, they love their car, they love the features about it, and you come in and you say, don't worry, it doesn't need to be calibrated, I just plug it in and plug it back in and put you on the road, I think they're going to be very skeptical of that. So I think we're entering this new phase because of all the technology cars have and how they're marketed with that in mind. You've got this scenario where consumers are hyper aware of all their features, want to make sure that they're taken back to pre-accident condition. And you as a repairer need to stay on top of your training around ADAS and EV so that your customers aren't running laps around you when it comes to these things.
I think there's a disconnect too, though, with people when they go in and buy these cars. They do want all those features and they love them. A lot of salespeople aren't telling them how much it costs to fix this stuff if something goes wonky. And I'm seeing a gap. I see this in my mail. People are sold on the features, absolutely. They know they're expensive because the car's never been more expensive. But there's a bit of a loss there between understanding that it's like when you buy a really expensive computer, you know it's going to cost more to maintain it. And that's where I think the work's cut out for everybody trying to repair these vehicles to teach consumers, because when it's new and shiny, they don't think about it. Then when it's dinged up, they're like, oh wait, I want everything to work the way it was supposed to work and being sold to work that way. Can you tell me a little bit about where we've started from and where we've come when it comes to shops being able to calibrate stuff properly? What percent are we moving the needle on people understanding?
I think we're moving in the right direction. Shops are getting the training. Shops are taking their iCar courses, and we're seeing an improvement. 6 or 7 years ago, I would say your average shop, if you fixed the car, plugged everything back in, and there wasn't a light on the dash, they'd probably just ship it out the door, put it back on the road. Not every shop, but probably your average shop. Today, what we're seeing is shops are aware of ADAS, they're aware of calibrations, and they're aware of the need to do calibrations. I still think that most calibrations are being missed by repairers because it is hard to identify them. But if you look at some of the industry trends, so CCC's crash report came out, and I think 12 or 13% of repairable appraisals have a line item for calibration. In Canada, Mitchell's latest data shows it's actually closer to 10% up here. I think that number should be closer to 30 or 40% if we were doing all the calibrations that we had to. So we have a long way to go, but I do think the industry has gotten quite a bit better compared to 5 or 6 years ago. There is more training going on. There is more education. We need to do better, but we have been doing better over these years. Yeah.
I want to ask you both about something recently in this province. If you had a crash previously, they say if there's $2,000 damage or less, you don't need to report it. Collision reporting, if there's no injuries, $2,000. Everyone looks at it and goes, oh, it's not that big. It can't be $2,000. And I've been begging them to understand that a little is $2,000 right there. They announced a few weeks ago they're upping that to $5,000. I see this as a good thing because it should clear out some of the small blemishy things maybe. But flip side, are we going to miss some of these very expensive components because they'll slip under that cap? So whoever wants to take this first, 2,000 versus 5,000, what's the impact on that, on collision reporting?
Well, from a reporting standpoint, I don't know if it will affect the repair industry, because the consumer or police officer may be deciding what this damage is, and they just have no idea typically. Yeah. And so it really, the amount of damage will be determined once it gets to a qualified repair shop. They're going to determine the damage, and when they're dealing with a educated insurer, then there's going to be no problem. The car is going to be repaired correctly. There would be a bit of a gap, I think, with consumers understanding what $5,000 of damage is, similar to understanding what $2,000 of damage is, or a police officer, quite honestly. They don't really understand what that is. So, the outcome, I don't think, is going to affect our industry.
I do wonder, raising the cap, if that will potentially have some negative effects on safety. I've seen accidents, little bumper accident, car looks fine, but underneath, a blind spot sensor is crumpled, the reinforcement bar is bent or broken, and that can have a serious impact on passenger safety down the line if the car is involved in another accident and it's hitting that same spot. Cars today are made to crumple, and it's not intuitive or clear just kind of looking at a vehicle sometimes about how damaged it actually is. So a lot of damage can be hidden behind a quarter panel or behind a bumper cover. And we can't expect a consumer to get out of their car after a crash and kind of eyeball it and say, no, that looks fine. No, it doesn't. So my only concern with kind of raising that threshold is that you can be involved in an accident and it can look not very serious, but structural components in that car could have been affected and could have crumpled or changed. And if you continue to drive that car on the road and it's hitting that same spot, the car will not provide you the same protection as it did if it was in an undamaged or properly repaired state. So
maybe forcing people to report, because usually when they think it's 2,000 or 1,500, it's 5,000.
Yep.
Now, if they think it's 5,000, so maybe having that cushion in there of erring on the side of caution, you think could be.
It may just help get cars into body shops where a estimator can actually, or a blueprinter can actually take a look at the vehicle and make sure that it's repaired properly, because I don't know of how many times it's been the case where a customer has brought a car into a body shop for maybe what they thought was a small job or a customer pay, and the body shop did some light tear down on the car, saw much more extensive damage, and then it went through insurance and the car was fixed properly. But the more we take cars out of the repair ecosystem, and I do think that kind of raising the reporting threshold might do that, it may have some negative effects for vehicle owners and passengers down the road if they think that they don't need to report it, and by extension don't need to take that car to a body shop to be fixed.
I like what you said about self-pay, because that's probably the biggest non-starter. Everyone thinks they can do a self-pay, and I beg them to understand they can't, and they're probably wrong, and now it could be even more expensive with all the components in the car. I'm going to ask both of you the same question, and it's totally unfair, and I apologize in advance. Whoever wants to go first can. What's the biggest challenge facing the industry this year, do you think? Or the year we're in. What's the biggest challenge you see, Stuart?
This year, I would say probably still people. Human resources is probably still the biggest challenge. It would certainly depend on who you ask, but you're asking me. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the biggest echo I hear across the country. Can't get people, can't retain people, can't attract people. You put a collision shop puts an ad in some typical spot where you might advertise for help, and they get zero response. That's a very typical scenario from what I hear. So workers. Shops are typically, a good shop is piled up with work, and they're having difficulty getting it back out in a repaired state.
That's fair. Nick, what do you think?
I agree. People are number one. If I were to say number two, it would probably be getting up to date on doing proper estimating, doing proper repair planning, getting the proper training, and having a focus on fixing the car right. This is like a 10-year problem. One of those things that we're getting better at slowly, but far too many shops don't have the training, don't have the knowledge, aren't pulling repair procedures for the cars that they fix, and are, by extension, whether they know it or not, are kind of cutting corners and missing important repair elements. So I would put that at or just below people, which certainly is the number one issue facing the shop owner, certainly. Yeah.
Let's zoom ahead 5 years. And let's say that the government's gotten behind legislation and more information is forthcoming from OEMs and things like that. Maybe we can get more people trained, the schools are catching up, the message is getting out there. Where are we in 5 years? Are we going to be able to have the calibration level that you would like to see on invoices?
So in 5 years, to be honest with you, I don't think ADAS is my big worry. I think in 5 years, we'll have gotten some significant improvements. I think we're going to see a lot of improvement in the sublet landscape. We're going to see calibration companies come in, servicing body shops. And I think in 5 years for ADAS, we're never going to be perfect, but we're going to be in a pretty good place. My attention 5 years down the road, and by the way, I still think people is going to be number one 5 years from now, and maybe even 25 years from now. But my attention starts to shift towards EVs. So if you take a look at the EV landscape now, the number one selling EV is Tesla. And so for a lot of body shops, I think they feel like they don't need to know a lot about repairing high voltage vehicles because most of the Teslas go to a Tesla certified repair center. They don't see them. And there's really not a whole lot of high voltage vehicles outside of the Tesla, right? So you're seeing a little bit more with Hyundai, Kia, and some other brands. But for the body shop, kind of repairing 50 to 75 cars, all brands per month today, they don't see a whole lot of EVs. They may see high voltage, so they may see hybrids, your Corollas hybrids and your RAV4 hybrids, your Explorer hybrids. But I think in 5 years, we're going to see a lot more EVs, a lot more plug-in EVs, and we're going to see a lot more hybrids. And shops today, by and large, do not have the proper training to properly power down an electric vehicle, to remove the battery, to kind of keep that car safe, understand how to store it. And we're going to be in a place in 5 years where you can't just say, you know what, I don't fix Teslas and I only see one EV a month, so I'm not going to worry about it. We have a huge learning curve to run up as an industry when it comes to high voltage vehicles, which can kill your workers, by the way, and that's probably not going to help with your talent attraction and retention goals, to say the least.
That's the understatement.
So that's where my mind goes to 5 years down the road. We've got a long way to go to get up to speed on high voltage.
Okay.
Yep.
We have to end this on a positive note instead of that one, even though that may be true. Stuart, what are we doing well today? What are we doing well right now? What gives you optimism and hope in the collision repair industry?
I think what we're doing well is, I think that we could maybe congratulate. I don't want to make this about networks, but some people are for networks and some people are against. But I think with the proliferation of networks across the country, they are raising the standard of the collision industry. I think that we're doing that fairly well, and it's not perfect, like Nick said. Not everybody is like our gold class shop and so on, but it is raising. They have a lot of power to raise awareness with consumers. They have a lot of power to bring shops up to the proper level of training and certifications and so on. So there's been a lot of talk lately amongst the industry of trying to develop a Canadian national standard for a collision repair to operate under, which may include things like ICAR Gold Class. So I think that we're on the track to make some really good, positive improvements to the industry, and like I said, I don't want to make this about networks. There's lots of shops that are not part of networks that are leaders in the industry and so on. It's just that they are able to get a lot done with less. So I think that those are positive things in the industry.
On that note, that's it for Curbside Chat. I'm your host, Lorraine Sommerfeld. I'd like to thank my guests, Stuart Klein and Nick Dominato. Both of you were terrific. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.